Justice for Grenfell! 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 Justice! Trust the FBU! Theresa May, we don't trust you! We trust the FBU! Theresa May!
People!
Power!
People!
Power!
Show me what community looks like!
This is what community looks like!
Show
We don't trust you! We trust the FBU! Theresa May, we don't trust you! We trust the FBU! Morris, Morris! Ow, ow, ow! Morris, Morris, Morris! Ow, ow, ow! Morris, Morris, Morris! Ow, ow, ow! No peace!
No justice!
No peace!
No justice!
No peace!
No justice!
No peace!
If they don't give us justice, then we won't give them peace!
If they don't give us justice, then we won't give them peace!
Kevin Courtney, and I'm the General Secretary of the NUT until last September, now the Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union, and I've come here today to bring solidarity greetings from my union to all the residents of Grenfell Tower who have suffered such tragedy, to the community around Grenfell Tower of all races and all faiths who have rallied to that community to support it and to demand justice, and to the firefighters who ran towards danger when politicians were turning their back. My union had members who lived in the tower, teachers who lived in the tower. They survived, but they lost dear friends and family. My members have been in the schools around the tower dealing with children who've suffered such tragedy since then. And I tell you, we have to be part, all of us, of demanding that this never happens again. But we all know that if it's not going to happen again, we have to look deep in our society at what went wrong to let it happen this time. It's inexcusable that it happened, and we have to look deep to understand why it came about. Now, I'm originally from South Wales, a town called Pontypridd. It's 8 miles down the valley from Aberfan. And some of you may know about the tragedy that happened in Aberfan. 50 years ago, I was 9. My dad had to take a workmate home from his factory. That man's 2 children had died in Aberfan when a coal tip slipped down the mountain, enveloping Pantglas Primary School, killing more than 100 children and their teachers. And I tell you, the similarities between Aberfan and Grenfell are striking to me. The people of Aberfan, like the people of Grenfell, knew that where they were living was dangerous. They were organising against that danger. They were saying to the authorities, it's dangerous, you have to do something about it. And the authorities ignored the people of Aberfan like they ignored the people of Grenfell. And they did it to save money. They did it because they didn't live in those places. They did it in Grenfell because they made a profit from it. We have to understand how deep these problems in our society are. Vital that justice is served. It's vital that the people who make decisions to make themselves more profit by using the cladding that they use, those people should face justice. The people who put on fire doors which didn't have the right security, those people should face justice. The people in Kensington and Chelsea Council who made decisions to go with those proposals because they wanted to save costs, those people should face justice. The people in this building who deregulated, who cut the fire service, who changed the rules about fire inspections, those people should face justice. We need justice in Grenfell. But I tell you what, the thing that turns your stomach most right now is the fact that they still are ignoring the people of the Grenfell Tower. That just like they've ignored the people of Aberfan for all those years, they haven't rehoused. They haven't taken steps. And then the yellow press tries to get us to turn against the firefighters. Never, never. Those men and women who ran towards danger, who ran into that fire, they deserve our utmost respect. Thank you. Thank you to the community of Grenfell. We stand united. Justice for Grenfell. And that means justice must be seen to be done. Fight on, fight on. We need housing, we need justice, we need prosecution.
Thank you, Kevin. Sisters and brothers, for those of you who don't know, the reason we're standing here is because this is the Home Office. So this is the building out of which the policy of creating a hostile environment for so-called illegal migrants emanated. This is the building, and it was from here that Theresa May, when she was Home Secretary, said that there should be that hostile environment for illegal migrants. Now, for anyone who thinks that marching and campaigning and protesting doesn't matter and that it doesn't make a difference, I have one word: Windrush.
And a year later, actually, they're now saying, oh, we will give you the money, but you know what? It will come out of the housing budget. It's the same Tory game, isn't it? The same as what the council was saying, you can have this, but it comes off that. They're still at that game, and they will continue to be at that game if we let them. The third thing they promised under pressure was an inquiry that would get to the bottom of it and sort out justice. And a year later, what? A year later, we're just beginning to hear what you all know happened on the night. And I mean, it's still shocking, it's still right that we hear it, and it's still right that we demand justice from these people, but this isn't it. The hot breath on their neck is the only way we conclude that we will get justice. So I think we need to commit, and we need to take these demands into all our unions, to every MP, to all our councils, to say every person displaced at Grenfell needs to be rehoused where they want to be, and with a tenancy, with a secure tenancy, and that needs to happen in 3 weeks. And if it takes putting putting £500 million on the table, if it takes buying the Affinity Sutton estate in Chelsea, which no, they're talking about demolishing, if it takes going and buying it and ensuring that everybody who needs a home has got one, then that's what needs to happen. Because shame on them. But there's some other things that need to happen. From Defend Council Housing point of view, I know there's arguments about this, but we think every part of the housing service needs to be brought back in-house under democratic control. Because it's not perfect, but if it's democratically accountable, and if we build and rebuild the tenants' organisations and demand the independent funding and hold these people to account, we have got a better chance than with the outsourced, deregulated contractor to a contractor, which is the world that created Grenfell and that we have to end. And the other thing that we have to demand is that all of the deregulation of fire safety and building control and all of the controls and checks on these rampant greedy people are reversed, so that we have building standards that we can trust, and that when we win the new generation of decent, secure and energy efficient council housing that John McDonnell was again promising us, that we get 500,000 proper council houses built, that we can trust that they are of a standard that will keep us and our children and our grandchildren safe in their beds, and that's what we need to fight for.
Thank you, Eileen. It's really important that we remember why we're standing here today. We have 72 people who are no longer with us, 72 people in our community, and they can't speak. And it's important that the living speak for them. We've heard about the promises that have been broken by the government. I'm going to ask you today to promise me two things. One is to tell one person on your way home the story of what happened at Grenfell. Each one tell one. And the other promise I want you to make to me is to never stay silent. Never stay silent about what happened at Grenfell. Our next speaker is Daniel Renwick. Daniel is one of our local activists. He is also the director and co-producer of a documentary called Grenfell, Failed by the State. Daniel Renwick.
Hello guys. We've had that hot breath on their neck for a year now, yeah? We have. I think it's important that people understand that what's happening with the shift we're seeing in discourse, which is targeting the fire service, is about a victory that was won in the first 5 minutes, right? After when Hillsborough happened and Lepin's Lane was flooded and the terraces led to 96 deaths in minutes, the police lied immediately. The police said that Liverpool fans who turned up late pushed through the gates. They said that they were drunk and unruly. And all of those lies led to a narrative that held for 24 years that deprived people of justice. Whereas what happened when the minute that fire started burning was that the community of North Kent got out and used the Grenfell Action Blog, right, and said that this redevelopment is the cause of this fire. And without that redevelopment, this would never have happened. And since then, we have held the narrative, right? And the media have followed the community. What we're seeing at this moment in time, and it begins really nefariously with a guy called Andrew O'Hagan's article, yeah? Now, what Andrew O'Hagan does is he, at the very top of our society, concentrates a new narrative. And he tries to tear apart the narrative that we know. And they don't even know viscerally, that we tell from our solar plexus. If you were there, you know that these lot weren't. You know that RBKC and the TMO completely failed. And I could tell that from the minute I got on the ground, and I knew they were lying. The amount of things that we found out in a year-long process, that now this guy creates a kaleidoscope at the top and says to the LRB that everything we know is wrong. He actually says, he has the gall to say that if it weren't for the stay put policy being maintained by the fire service, not a single life would have been lost. And to a certain extent, he's right. Yeah? To a certain extent, there was operational procedures and orders given on that night that meant that the mistakes were made from the fire service, but to blame the fire service for the complete breach of architectural standards, for the complete breach of fire safety, for the procurement policy of RBKC that didn't have any fire safety built into it, or for the targeted sale of that installation by Celotex, to say that that's the fire service's responsibility is to rewrite history, right? To say that the Grenfell Action Group threw criticisms of the council into the air like confetti at a whore's wedding is gendered, disgusting, and quite frankly untrue. And the thing is, even his documentary accompanies the piece. Yeah? Anthony Wilkes says that if the independent inquiry into the redevelopment of Grenfell that the Grenfell Action Group asked for was put into practice, not a single life would have been lost. That is the narrative that we hold, right? The narrative is a redevelopment policy that was done in abstraction from and to the deep and profound worsening of their lives, of anyone who existed in Grenfell. They knew it from the inception. Yeah? There's David Collins is here, I saw him earlier. He was chair of the Grenfell Residents Association, which the TMO forced to become a compact. And the thing is that on every conceivable level, barring the insulation and the cladding, they challenged, right? But how much vigilance is the state asking? If the people who are going through these processes of redevelopment are supposed to test all of these things for themselves. And then you can have the gall to say of the Grenfell Action Group that they didn't say anything that was true, and that they've created a narrative that has infected all of us, and all of us apparently are just a rabble who like to believe what we're told and don't do any critical thinking. And this type of discourse is coming out now, and it's coming out just around the public inquiry. Why? Because RBKC and the TMO and the corporations are going to try and defend themselves, right? And they're going to defend themselves by saying that we are irrational, right? That we like to believe what we're told, that actually we just pay for blood, and that these individuals within the council who were property developers and councillors, who were the divisions within RBKC and the cabinet system aren't made a problem. The conflicts of interest aren't made a problem. What's made a problem of is the fact that we have such a problem with one class dominating an area that is working class and depriving them of a voice, depriving any route of accountability, and a redevelopment structure that actually means that they are built in for a future. Now, Grenfell should be a turning point. Yeah? Grenfell should be a turning point in our politics and our culture, in every conceivable area. And the thing is, we know that and we argue it, right? They're scared of what we know and they're scared of how we can weaponize this thing. But there's a way in which we need to do it, right? Now, Grenfell United have done some incredible things in the last few months, and I'd just like to say that the fact that we have to have the bereaved and survivors campaign for national fire safety is a scandal that should put Theresa May's head on the plaque. The fact that we had promises that were broken, that Eileen just listed, is just, it beggars belief, right? And the thing is that has led to certain truths being told. It put the local authority in quite a difficult situation, because actually, this is a central government issue more than it's a local government issue, now especially, right? These regulations, or the lack thereof, present a very real threat to human life, and they violate what we conceive to be the relationship between subject and state, right? We pay our council tax, we do all the things because we believe that we are safe, right? The liberties we give up are supposed to be bought for with safety that is being given away, ripped away, sold away, in every conceivable level. The market state is the fundamental issue here, and we need to turn the tide against it at this very moment in time, because otherwise, these lot are going to exploit every conceivable loophole, and what to them is a business mentality is actually the deprivation of our lives, right? Of the conditions that maintain our lives. And the thing is that we are lurching towards Brexit, right? And Brexit is based on two fundamental things in public discourse, right? You'd say it's borders, migrants on the one hand, and deregulation on the other. I think that's a fair characterization, whether you're Alexiteer or not, yeah? I think that's fine. If we're going to go forward with something with racism and deregulation at its heart, ask yourself one question, innit? Do you really think that that's going to stop another Grenfell from happening? And, yeah, if we're going to make political demands off the back of this, we have to win a battle that defends the working class, defends regulations that were won for by working class battles. The things that we are talking about here are the things that we won through generations because we have a right to life. Yeah? These lot are tearing up our right to life, and they're doing it for money, innit? So let's stop them, and let's stop them now, but do it in a way that appreciates and respects that there is a profound leadership that comes from the community affected, right? That they don't need people speaking for them or organizing for them, and actually there is a real discourse to be had, right? Yes, we can agitate, yes, we can make noise, yes, it's nice to shout justice for Grenfell on the streets, because I've walked silently many a time, but there's a power in that silence as well, right? And there's a power in North Kent, and I would really encourage those on the radical left here and the unions here to go and speak to the different community provisions and get a sense of what is actually happening down there, because they felt it, right? Something's changed in Britain through a process of deregulation, through a process of Thatcherism, through the imposition of the market state, with a shift in our nativist discourse, and Grenfell brought that all home, and it's a concentrated dose, and you can feel it there, I'm not joking, right? So if you go around there, then come and try and think about new processes of organising that does it with, not for, then I think we're going to have a very powerful movement. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. Sisters and brothers, Yvette said to promise never to be silent, and I agree with that, but of course there is one time when we do want you to be silent, and that is when you come on the silent marches, which are incredibly powerful. And one of the great things that has happened is that those marches have spread to other towns and cities, so they happen on the 14th of June, not just in Grenfell itself, but in a whole number of areas, Bristol, Manchester, Liverpool, and so on. And it's great that so many people around the country are taking up the rallying cry. It is fantastic, for example, that today we have people from, I know people from South Yorkshire, from Sheffield, from Doncaster, from Rotherham and Barnsley. And we've had a number of messages of support, and I'm going to ask you, to bear with me here, because we have a poem from Dave Alton from Barnsley. I think he's a trade unionist, and I'm going to attempt to read the poem, so I hope you're going to bear with me with this. It's called The Grenfell Calamity. In New Hartley by Whitley Bay, pursuing profit from coal, a simple single shaft was sunk, deep as a tower is tall. But then, come 1862, a curse of the pitman's craft. Beam of the pumping engine broke, plunging down, blocking the shaft. Just one way in, just one way out, and no other way to go. Brief lives, older and not so old, perished in the dark below. 155 years from that beam striking death's knell. New Hartley to North Kensington, the Hester Pit to Grenfell. Tower tall as a shaft is deep, being served by a single stair. And all was well, and all was well, until fire erupted there. A plugged shaft sealed in deadly gas, an open star filled with smoke, and it's all those who are trapped within who must breathe foul air and choke. Then, of course, there's an inquiry. One burning question comes through. Why no second way out? Because one way is cheaper than two.
When David Cameron could brag and boast about what he called a bonfire of regulations. When Theresa May's hostile environment meant that those people who were immigrants and were afraid about their documentation didn't come forward after the fire and didn't get the support that they needed, that is at the hands of this government, and we should never let them forget it. Grenfell Tower will forever be a symbol of Tory austerity. It was a melting pot of the issues that we face in this country. The housing crisis, the cuts, the sheer neglect and callous disregard for human life. And 1 year on from the fire, we see that 2/3 of the families have still not been given permanent housing, despite the fact that there are over 1,300 empty properties in the borough. It's despicable, it's outrageous, and it's unacceptable. And I've seen firsthand how this very same council of Kensington and Chelsea deal with fire regulations and enforcement of those fire regulations in the richer parts of the borough. On High Street, Kensington, you wouldn't have a fire like Grenfell Tower because they make sure that those people are safe. But when it's poorer, ethnic minority people, they don't care. And today, 1 year on, there are still over 270 tower blocks around the country with the same cladding that the government, who promised they would give funds to make sure that cladding is removed, have now refused to do so. The fact that a year later, we still have to campaign for sprinklers is unacceptable. And this is the same government that filibustered and voted against a law making it a legal requirement only for landlords to make sure that the properties were fit for human habitation. The most basic requirement you would expect of any housing. They voted against it. And it's important, especially coming from the People's Assembly Against Austerity, to recognize that when they say that they don't have money to remove the cladding and they don't have money for sprinklers, what do they have money for? They have £1 billion to give to the DUP so that they can stay in power. They have millions and millions to make overnight decisions to bomb people in Syria, but they don't have money to save people in this country. They have millions and millions to give tax cuts to the richest people in society, the same people who own the kind of companies that cut costs that kill people in this country. And so we can never forget it. And it is absolutely shameful, it is beyond shameful that they are trying to now blame the very firefighters who heroically saved people in the tower that year. And that's why it is so important and an absolute privilege that the fact that this demonstration has been called, co-organized by the Fire Brigades Union. Because while the Tories right after the fire were commending the firefighters and saying how heroic and brave they are. For a year since, they kept the same firefighters on a 1% pay cap, and now they're saying it was their fault. It is an absolute shame. And in a similar vein, they're doing the same thing to our health service workers. They are gutting the NHS, and that's why the People's Assembly has called a national demonstration, and also to celebrate the 70-year anniversary of the NHS on the 30th of June, because the Tories, once again, as they've done with all these things, will pretend that they care about the NHS. They will celebrate and say it's a proud accomplishment while destroying it at the same time. And that's why it's important that we're out on the streets to say that no, we celebrate the NHS and we demonstrate against you destroying it. And we have to understand that all these things are connected. When we defend the NHS, we defend the firefighters, we defend the people who have been neglected and attacked by this government. So I urge everyone to be on that demonstration. And one last thing, the People's Assembly are also one of the organizations that are helping to call the demonstration against Donald Trump, who's coming to Britain on July the 13th. Once again, Theresa May showing just how much regard she has for the British public. And Theresa May has made it clear that in any future trade deal with Donald Trump, the NHS is not off the table. Any regulations that will be scrapped to meet American standards are not off the table. So we need to be out there to make it clear that we oppose them. And we will be on the streets and will not leave the streets until we get rid of this government, until we get justice for Grenfell, and until we win. So thank you.
Greetings from the Fire Brigades Union. It is an immense privilege, despite the appalling circumstances, to have got to know a bit and worked with the community of North Kensington and the community around Grenfell. And it's been a privilege to have done that and to work with these amazing women who've organised this campaign, and they have our full support. Now, I'm going to say several things about what happened last year and what's happened since, and the people I represent, the firefighters. The first thing I want to say is the Fire Brigades Union is not the London Fire Brigade. They will answer for themselves. We agree with them on some issues and we disagree with them on many issues as well. But we represent the people who were sent into that tower that night, who almost to a person are members of a trade union, members of our union, the Fire Brigades Union. And I have to say, in my 35 years in this industry, I have never, because no one has ever seen in the UK something on that scale. And what they face, firefighters do deal with horrific situations, that's part of what they do, but no one has seen that, no one has dealt with that, no one has experienced that, and no one has experienced the aftermath of that. And I am immensely proud of those people and what they did that night. Now, in terms of our record, from day one, we said as a union that we stood shoulder to shoulder with the bereaved, with the community, and we wanted to see justice for that community and justice for those who had lost friends and family in that horrific fire. And our record is a long one. It's our centenary year this year. And trade unions are about pay and conditions, but the Fire Brigades Union has never been just about pay and conditions of firefighters. We have a record second to none of campaigning on public safety, whether that's the safety regulations in public buildings and your workplaces. When you look at fire escapes and fire drills that you now have, those were because people like us in the 1950s and 1960s campaigned to stop people dying when we had fires in factories and warehouses. And in the 1980s we campaigned to improve the furniture that fills our homes, to stop people dying from the cyanide that was in foam-filled furniture. And then we campaigned to go out and educate people about making themselves safer in their homes. So we have a record on that. And I want to, this past year, and people have mentioned it several times, the silent walks. I have been on many of those silent walks. I've been in politics since I've been a teenager, and I have to say I have never experienced anything as powerful as those silent walks, to see the numbers of people who turn out and to see an entire community fall silent in that way is one of the most powerful emotional experiences I've ever seen. And the one this week I think was truly remarkable. It's a tribute to that community and a tribute to the people who've campaigned and stuck together throughout these difficult period. And we saw that also in the aftermath of the fire. I attended the Grenfell Tower fire. In fact, I was there the day that Theresa May turned up. And I was there the day that Jeremy Corbyn turned up. And even at that time, you could see what a sharp difference between the two visits, both inside the cordon, where firefighting operations were going on, and also, of course, out in the community where Theresa May didn't bother to speak to the community. She now says she regrets that. Well, I have to say, it's a year too late to regret it. And we saw a magnificent community response, but we also saw appalling failure from those people who are supposed to be in authority in local government and, yes, in central government. But we did see ordinary people sticking together to look after, feed and clothe and take care of each other, and that was remarkable to see. I want to say something about the firefighters that night. The firefighters attending Grenfell Tower faced an impossible situation. We don't know, we've not heard the evidence, you've not heard the evidence as yet. I know some of the facts of what people faced that night. I have no hesitation at all in saying that each and every one of them went above and beyond what is required of them, what they're prepared for and what they're trained for at night. Firefighters have specialist equipment. You saw the turntable ladder just drive around the road earlier. Firefighters have special fire gear, they have breathing apparatus, they have other equipment, but they're not superheroes, they're human beings. They have procedures that are based on years and years and decades of experience. Sadly, all too often, when other firefighters have lost their lives, we make improvements to our procedures. And the truth is, at Grenfell, none of those procedures could be implemented, because this was a fire that no one expected, no one planned for, and no one trained for. And so people in reality were making it up as they went along, using their experience to do their best as they could in an impossible situation. And the truth is this, and people have questions to ask, and we in the Fire Brigades Union are not afraid of those questions. People have the right to ask questions, and people have the right to ask difficult and challenging questions of the fire service and of firefighters, and no one is running away from those difficult questions, and that's what we face over the coming weeks. But I do take exception then to well-paid journalists who have never run into a building while other people are running out, telling us from their instant expertise that they're suddenly magically expert at the job that our people do, and telling them all about the failures they made that night. It's an insult. It's an insult, by the way, to those who lost their lives, and it's an insult to those who tried to stop people from losing their lives. And a period of silence from some of those people would be welcome. There are questions that have been raised about race and class, and they're obvious questions. I've got no doubt at all, it's glaringly obvious that what we had is a hostile environment for a working class community in North Kensington, and particularly because of where many of those people came from and their backgrounds. That's stark, staringly obvious to everyone. And in the fire service, by the way, we've got issues in the past about racism and sexism and other issues. I'll tell you our union's record. We've been on the front line many times of tackling racism and challenging and confronting fascism on the streets when necessary, and that's our record. But I will say this, that the London Fire Brigade is the most diverse fire service in the UK. And John McDonnell mentioned our conference earlier on. We heard from there at that conference. We have members of ours who grew up on that estate. We have members of ours who attended the fire who grew up on that estate. And the idea that they or anyone else was making judgments about people as they were trying to save lives, that is a disgraceful and disgusting slur on those people. And the missing question, with all this debate around what the fire service did and didn't do in it, and the truth is that every emergency incident people make mistakes because you're dealing with changing situations and very dangerous situations. But the missing question, and this is why people are trying to move the narrative on, as was mentioned earlier, is why were they even facing that situation? Because the fundamental question here is why and how can we wrap buildings in petrol in this country? And that's what happened at Grenfell Tower. They built a tower block in 1974 and they designed fire safety into that building, and people came along over the subsequent decades and wrecked it and put flammable cladding on the outside of it. And every time I think of it, despite being around this for many years, all my adult life, I still cannot fathom how we can do that in this day and age. So we have to ask questions about what happened specifically that night and in the run-up to it, but the deeper questions are, how do we even have a regime, a system of regulations, tests, inspections and enforcement that allows them to get away with what they did at Grenfell? And I'll say this, and some of you may have been at the meeting. I spoke at a meeting at the Maxilla a few months ago, and I read out a quote from my union from 1999, where following a fire where flammable cladding had been applied to a building in Ayrshire in Scotland and one gentleman died, we made a warning about the dangers of flammable cladding on buildings and what that might do in the event of a fire. And we didn't make that to the fire service in Scotland or to the London Fire Brigade. No, we made that down the road in the House of Commons. This is supposed to be the heart of government. For people to say they didn't know about these risks is simply not true. The warnings were there, and we made those warnings. And we're in favour, where appropriate, of prosecutions. But let's not just go after the little criminals. We need to hold the big criminals to account in this process as well. And in the year since Grenfell, I've described, people say, how can this even happen? They talk about complacency. Well, for me, it is criminal complacency. And I've seen no change in criminal complacency in the months since the Grenfell Tower fire happened. And that needs to be challenged and that needs to be addressed. We now have this inquiry. And I have to say, we've raised our concerns about whether that inquiry can fulfill the desire of the bereaved, can fulfill the needs of the community to actually answer the real questions and provide justice. Because we have our doubts about that process, although we are participating in it. Because they are inviting people to give them expert witnesses, for example, within the fire service, people who themselves have overseen years and years of cuts and deregulation in their own services, and then brought in to be expert advisors to that panel. And the question for us is, all those people who provided advice to government at every single stage, they need to be held to account as well. And all the ministers who've signed off regulations, they need to be held to account as well. And this is, people have mentioned austerity. Austerity undoubtedly is part of this, but this is a longer story than just the past 8 years. 1999 I mentioned, and we've seen deregulation in the fire service and deregulation in relation to housing for 30 and nearly 40 years. And governments of both persuasions have been responsible for that as well. And the Grenfell Tower inquiry will make recommendations. But interestingly, one of the questions they've asked us is, what are the previous recommendations that you're aware of that have been ignored? And the truth is, there are dozens of them. Sadly, we go to inquests for firefighters who die. and we find a recommendation made by a coroner, and we go to another coroner's inquest 5 years later, and another coroner makes exactly the same recommendations that they've been ignoring for the previous 5 years. So you will find at the end of this process that people were warned, that letters were written to government ministers and they were ignored as well. That's what I believe we will find in the course of this process. So the idea that we have faith and confidence that even if they produce recommendations, the government over there will do anything about it, I think we have to be sceptical. The only thing we can rely on is ourselves. The only thing that is going to bring change is organising ourselves to ensure that change is delivered. And that means, by the way, it cannot simply mean the community around Grenfell. It cannot simply mean the community of North Kensington. We cannot leave it to them. This is a national issue. We know 300 tower blocks, residential tower blocks with the same cladding, and a government that refuses to remove it or pay for it. A government that refuses to ensure that fire safety standards are applied in each of those. So we need to build a mass movement. This has been a great day today, but it's not enough. If we want to change things, we need to come back 10 times stronger than we did today. We need every trade union here at the next time. And by the way, if they don't listen to us, we don't need to just demonstrate. We need to stop this city still in its tracks. That's the way we will win change. Solidarity forever, justice for Grenfell.
Let them hear you. Get up, stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up. Don't give up the fight. Sing it out. Get up, stand up. Make them hear you. Stand up for your rights. Little louder. Get up, stand up. Tell them. Don't give up the fight. So now we see the light. What we gonna do? Stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up. Stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up. Don't give up the fight. Get up, stand up. Stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up. Don't give up the fight. Until the philosophy which hold one race superior and another what inferior is finally and permanently what discredited and abandoned. Well, everywhere is war, a dish of war, until there's no longer first class nor second class citizens of any nation, until the color of a man's skin is of no more significance than the color of his eyes. I've got to say war. What? Until the basic human rights are equally guaranteed to all without regards to race. A dish of war. Cause until that day, the dream of lasting peace, world citizenship, rule of international morality will remain but a fleeting illusion to be pursued but never attained. Cause everywhere is war, the dish of war. Everywhere is war, dish of war. So sing with me, people. We don't need no more trouble. Your time, sing it out. We don't need no more no more trouble. Sing it out one more time, we don't. No more trouble.